Life Coach Friday. Every other Friday, I'm streaming to you. Annette and I are on different community pages and on YouTube, where we tackle a lot of questions that plague me personally.
Yeah, this is your bonus life coaching session.
That's right. And the ones that we hear about from you as well. If you didn't know already, Annette is my life coach as well, which is how we connected. And today is a very exciting topic because it is New Year's Eve. Woo!
Woo!
Which I gotta ask first. Do you stay up and do New Year's Eve celebrate? Are you a midnight person?
Not anymore. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No. Mm-mm. No, that was
Okay.
definitely for younger years. How about you?
No. And not, I can't even say that prior. You know what I think it is? Because I've been thinking about this because people always ask, oh, what are your New Year's plans? And for most of my adult life, it's been nothing. I think I did something one time some years ago and honestly totally regretted it.
Hmm.
So, but it's
There's
it's
a
just
lot of
not
regret
been.
that goes along with New Year's. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Just I'm
Let's
not
not
a
talk
I'm
about
no, we will not discuss those details at this moment. But I am not a nighttime, late night person so much. It's just, not. I kind of like to be kind of tucked in cozy at home.
that. I do. Yeah, the TV viewing is good. TV viewing is good.
It is. There's
Mhm.
some.
There's
But
some.
what we're going to talk about today with Annette Walters here is the how to avoid the pitfalls of New Year's resolutions. Many of us make them, sometimes we voice them, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we achieve them. I think many times we do not. And being that it's New Year's Eve and we're going into the new year with 2022, we thought this is a good time to talk about what these pitfalls are and how do we actually go about, making these decisions stick.
Hmm.
So where
Yeah, 'cause
like I
the
don't know.
the shelf life on a New Year's resolution, I think, is something like 20 or 30 days, maybe. Maybe. Think about all those gym memberships that are purchased up front. Yeah. I
Yeah,
don't know
I've
how
done
many
that.
times I've done that. Yeah. Yeah, I've done
I
that.
have paid for many a gym. I have not
Haven't
been
used
to
the
many a
gym,
gym.
but no, no. But, we have all these great ideas and we think, I'd really like my life to change. And as the clock changes from 2021 to 2022, it's just normal that we go, okay, let's take a look at this. I think I'd like to do some things differently. But, with, as I said, a shelf life of 20 to 30 days, can you actually get anything done? And if it doesn't stick, what is the freaking point?
Hmm.
So I know a lot of people have given up even making New Year's resolutions, like, oh, that's just too much pressure, or they never work. But, there's got to be a time in our lives where we do decide to make changes. And so we're talking about that today.
Yes, and we want to hear from you. We do Life Coach Friday live because we want it to be interactive. So go ahead and post a comment, ask a question. Would love to hear if you've decided on a New Year's resolution for this year or not. What would you say, Annette, is I mean, the problem I think is the follow through, right? I think there's a
Hmm.
lot of us who we have in mind what we want to change, what we want to improve on, what we want to try to do differently in a new year. Personally, and I've done New Year's resolutions, but I've always felt a little like, about it. And I think it's mainly because
Yeah.
I love the idea of a new year because one, you get a new calendar. Every year my grandma would send me a
Clean.
calendar, yeah, send me a calendar from Hawaii. Um, and that was like, oh, my new year, my new calendar.
Hmm.
But I also try to see, each day as a new opportunity to try and do something differently if I wanted to. So I kind of
Hmm.
felt a little pushed back on the whole thing for a year. But I've also come to realize it's because I've not stuck with most of my New Year's resolutions.
Hmm. And I think that's probably why most people by this age are like, why even do it? Why even
Yeah.
try? But if you apply that logic to New Year's resolutions, what else are you not trying or not doing because you think, well, what's the point? I'm not going to change. It's always going to be the same. I always like to tell the story. I tried life coaching years ago, and there's a lot of different types of life coaching out there. The life coaching that I tried back in the day was specifically for accountability. So we would make lists of things that I would do, and then I would meet with her again, and we'd talk about what I did and what I didn't do, and things like that. The challenge was is that at the time I was in my mid 40s and I had hired her to hold me accountable. Well, by about week 3 or 4, I was like, "Yeah, no, I didn't do that." And she'd just
Hmm.
look at me and she'd go, "Well, why didn't you do it? You should be doing it. You said you'd like to do it." And I was like, no, mm-mm." Kind of like your reaction, to New Year's resolutions. And what I found out of that experience is that, it's we want these things in our lives, but even accountability, they say, well, uh, tell everybody about what you want to do. Well, I think we all get to that place in life where we go, no, not going to do it. Or, yeah, I don't care if somebody knows that I didn't do it. I'll justify it or rationalize it. However, and we don't actually make the change. Good morning, Andrew and Molly. Thank you for joining us and commenting.
You
And
know,
so, yeah.
that's funny because you and I have a little different view on that one. And if you ever thought Annette and I did not disagree, this is a great example of it. Public accountability gets me every time. If I tell enough people,
Mhm.
which if any of you follow me on social media, I like to refer to myself as a chronic oversharer. And in part because for me that helps to motivate me. But I think that and before we sat down to do this, we had a little bit of a chat about it. And Annette, I think you really identified what some of those key issues are as to why it doesn't work, why that accountability doesn't work for some, why it works for some, but overall what it has to do with motivation.
Mhm.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, because accountability in and of itself does not provide motivation. Accountability, at least in my opinion, is just almost checking off a box. And, maybe somebody comes alongside and you go, "Oh, yeah, I had meant to do that. Thanks for reminding me for that." But that already shows a bit of internal motivation or internal reasoning as to why we do something or why we don't do something. And so, what I loved about our conversation before is that you were talking about accountability and the fact that you made your thing more publicly known. And you had somebody come up to you and say, "Hey, listen, I really appreciate you sharing that because now I can do it too." And so, talk about how that made you feel to have this person come up and acknowledge you that way.
Sure. So that was when I didn't, when I decided to stop drinking, I did not do it as a New Year's resolution. It was literally kind of a that day thing. It was July 1st. And the other day I thought it was 3 years ago, but I think it might be 4. I got to look at a calendar.
2020 doesn't exist. We keep skipping it in our count.
I
So
know. So I feel like I missed a year somewhere in
we
there.
all did. We all did.
Yes, but I was public about it. I had shared my experience or throughout. I At the time I was writing a column for the Lecture Weekly, which I wrote for over a decade, called Outside the Box, where I just shared things I would do in the community that were outside my comfort zone. And that was definitely part of it. And then I would share it on social media too around, my anniversary and here and there when my anniversary when I stopped drinking.
Mhm.
And I would share about that as I would kind of work through things on my own because I'm always curious about other people's experience with this. And again, had written about it. And so I was in a store locally and this woman approached me and started talking about it and I had not met her before. And basically said that she'd been reading about what I've been writing and was questioning her own struggles with alcohol, and it was motivating for her she didn't feel so alone because a lot of women, I think, especially when it's such a social part of our culture,
Mhm.
And when you're not drinking and your friends are, it's kind of like, oh, come on, have a drink, or why aren't you drinking? Or the assumption is, are you pregnant? And that was really, selfishly rewarding for me. Like, okay, I'm glad, because I often will talk about these things because that's how I process. I
Mm-hmm.
process things by talking about it, but also by talking about it with different people who have different points of view, who then, when they look at what I'm talking about, it allows me to see it from a different point of view. And for me, it just makes me feel like a more well-rounded individual. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how I felt that public accountability motivated me. It wasn't really that it was so public in accountability, I guess. It was that motivation of thinking that, wow, if somebody else, even one person more would be great, can be, get something out of it, then it's worth talking about.
Mm-hmm. And see, that's one of the things that, is so important to talk about for accountability, because accountability is one of those things that is ultimately internally driven. Accountability done best is when we are accountable to ourselves and we show up. And sometimes, we start off with having other people help us do it. But like in my case, it's like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that anymore. And you can't be my accountability partner anymore, type of a thing. We can fire them. The person that we can't fire is ourselves. And so when we learn how to show up for ourselves, and we do get those public, like other people who come alongside, and it's like, you've encouraged me, that also makes us feel good, and we can push forward. And maybe that being public about what we're doing turns around to hoping that we will be an encourager for other people. Even if we don't know, we are still an encourager. We have that in our brain, and that's what we end up being accountable to, and not actually other people.
Ah, yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I
Mhm.
love what Bill's chiming in with: authority, responsibility, and accountability are three legs of a stool. Remove one
Mhm.
leg, and the stool doesn't work. I
Mhm.
like that. But Bill, if you'd be willing to comment, what do you mean by the authority part? I get the responsibility and accountability. I just wasn't
Mhm.
sure about the authority part. So pop us a new comment there if you can clarify that. So you're what if I'm understanding you, Annette, what you're saying then is identifying what our motivation is. What are we
Mhm.
gonna get out by following through on this New Year's resolution? And
Mhm.
I'll throw you one that is on my list, and it is probably the biggest one. And and then maybe I can get some public accountability.
We'll start
um,
there.
yes. And we'll get into my motivation and all that. But it's, and Annette, you've known me for a long time. Oh, there's something in my eye. So you know this, and some of you know that I grew up in Scientology and left when I was an adult. I had four generations of my family in Scientology, which is a cult, and I left after 35 years. And for some time now, and I've been out for over a decade, and I've been processing a lot. It's just been coming off in layers, and I have Annette to thank for a lot of that and helping me with the tools to process that and get through figuring out, who the heck I am. And I know we all go through that, whether you grew up in a cult or not, is finding out who we are. But when you grow up in Scientology, it's a very controlled mind control environment. And you're pretty much given, here's a book about what you should think about this. Like, here's the rule book. This is what you should think. This is what you should follow. There's no questioning it. And I've wanted to share more about my experience growing up in Scientology, but each time I sat down to do it, it was just too painful to face a lot of it again. And
Mhm.
now I feel like I'm really at a point now in my recovery from that where it's time. It's time to unburden a lot of those secrets. There's a lot of secret keeping in it, which is a part what causes so much of the turmoil. It's like I'm carrying around this backpack of secrets that I don't
Mhm.
need to hold on to anymore. And
Mhm.
so my New Year's resolution is I just started writing about it, and I'll share a link to that too. I'm blogging about it. And to keep doing that. And I don't know what that's going to become, what that's going to be. It is for me, but it is also for other people. This is where you really hit the nail on the head with, my motivation. But that's a big thing. So that's my New Year's resolution that I'm working
Mhm.
on.
So let's talk about this from both sides because you
Hmm.
bring up a really good point because, you know, you're motivated to do it now, but for years you had it on your mind that you should share it. But when we do something as humans, we always get something out of it. And this is a really good point to make as we set our New Year's resolutions. Because, there are these things that we want to do or we want to change in our lives, but we get actually as much out of what we don't do as what we do do. So, what did you get out of not doing it before? About not sharing your story?
Easy. I did not have to face it. I did not have to re experience a lot of what I now know is trauma and deal with it. That's huge. Denial is a very comfortable place to be in for a period of time. And that's where I was, just to compartmentalize it. We're indoctrinated in Scientology. I was from childhood, from when I first started my actual training in Scientology, I was about 9. And from
Mm.
that point on, it is all about, there's so much secrecy in it. And so not having to re-experience a lot of those things that were covered up, that were, I was told not to talk about. You don't deal with it. You just put it in a box. And
Right.
for a long time I thought, well, you know what? I'm just moving beyond that. I'm out of it. My family's out of it. My immediate family, I
Mhm.
left with 3 generations of my family. I have some extended family remotely involved. Lost, pretty much most of my friends who were in Scientology at the time. And over a lifetime, that was pretty much most of my friends.
Oh, yeah.
And so there was a lot of pain during, after in that. So by not sharing about it, not writing about it. And again, I just got done saying, I am a chronic oversharer. I'm a writer. I'm a columnist. It's what I do. It's what I talk about. Also in real estate, let's not forget that. But this is, writing is my passion, and that's how I
Mhm.
process. So it allowed me to not have to face that and not have to experience those negative emotions that, in Scientology, we weren't even allowed to experience. You were taught to just, like robot your way through it.
Mhm. Yeah, because what you were doing is that you were literally keeping yourself safe in some ways.
Hmm.
There is that part of our brain that triggers the fight or flight. It's one of its main directives is just to keep us safe. And keeping us safe means that we shut down. In your case, you don't share, you don't acknowledge,
Hmm.
because we build our wall. And if we shut down, we may be miserable, but literally, like, our bodies are safe. And that's what we're programmed to do, is to perpetuate and keep going.
Oh,
And
exactly.
so those ideas of, bringing up the past, bringing up these negative emotions, which that side of the brain really, it categorizes negative emotions, painful emotions a lot of times as something that will literally kill us.
Hmm.
And just doesn't understand that it's just what we're walking through in our own brains to get to the other side. Luckily, we've got the prefrontal cortex, or that decision making side of the brain, because that's the place where we can go, you know what? It is going to be painful. I'm going to acknowledge you. And yes, but this isn't going to kill me. And I am going to step out, because what I realize is that by sharing, and I think this is what well, you and I have talked about it over the last week or so, is to how writing this and making some of these stories public was almost cathartic.
Mm.
It was releasing some of that, the secrets, because secrets a lot of time lead to suffering.
Oh,
When
yes.
we are isolated,
Absolutely.
it's like we're perpetuating suffering, which is so odd because our brains, don't want us to have negative emotions, but we sit in this suffering. And ultimately it's something that we create for ourselves in
Hmm.
the area of trying to protect ourselves. So, in the life coaching a lot, that's what we do, is that we sift out all of these things so that we can make decisions and we can actually put down the things that are causing suffering that we can put down.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Kara, for your kind words there. We shall see. You know. And you're very right. And a lot of the ways in working with you of a life coach, as a life coach, I can unpack these things in layers and do it in a way that's somewhat manageable. And that's for me kind of how it's come off. But what I've really been able to identify with you is my motivation for doing so. And it hit me that my motivation for sharing my upbringing in Scientology and what it was like to leave and what life was like after is, one, it's very cathartic for me to face things that I didn't face before and to actually experience emotions, even though a lot of times I don't want to. Oh, great. Now I'm going to cry on our live. Bear with me, everyone. But my motivation is because, my grandchildren, I have 2 grandchildren. I have 3 children. The first one to my family, after 4 generations in Scientology, they've never been in it. And they never will. And when I left with most of my family intact. But a lot of people didn't and still don't. I have friends whose parents won't speak to them. I know people whose children won't speak to them just because they left Scientology. I've seen marriages broken up. I've seen families broken up. And that is not even the worst of it. And so by my motivation in sharing it is also for me to be able to go through exactly what I'm doing right now, these emotions that I just have suppressed for a long time, but also for the other people. There are more people out of Scientology. There are more ex-Scientologists than there are Scientologists. That's what I believe. And I can't imagine too many people are, running out and joining Scientology with all the, the press in recent years, and Leah Remini's show, Mike Rinder's show, Scientology Aftermath, which I have to share, I just started watching, even though it came out years ago, because it was just too painful to watch. But that's my motivation. If the people before me never spoke out, if they never went public with what happened, which I was able to find when I was in Scientology and I was in the church and I was going through a lot of the, trauma and things that were happening. I thought it was just me. That's what happened. You think it's just you. And I think it's like that with whatever your battle is. If it's, not everyone grew up in a cult, but I always say everybody has their cult. You do. You've been in a controlling situation, a controlling group, maybe a controlling partner, parents, other groups. There's always something that I think people can relate to, which is why I think people find the topic, they're curious about it and somewhat fascinated by the whole, like, how did this happen? And how was it hidden for such a long time? At least the abuses in Scientology. So by going through that, it helped me emotionally, but also I need to do more for those other people as well. Because if people before me didn't say something, I wouldn't have known that it wasn't just me. I would not have seen those things that, God bless the internet, which made it possible for people to become whistleblowers and start sharing about the abuses in Scientology. So to not, I feel like I need to pay that forward, and that it's been enough time that's, again, going back to my New Year's resolution of sharing that experience. And I will link to my blog that I'm sharing about in the caption. That's my motivation to do, to be able to talk about some of it without having this happen.
But having this happen is part of the process. Because, when we really just sit, because usually if we were in a coaching session, one of the things that I would do is that I would ask her where the sadness lands in her body, literally.
Right
and we
here.
would talk about the tightness in her chest. We would talk about just allowing it and feeling those emotions in the moment, because these are the things, these things that we feel in our body are the reason why we don't release this. And when we acknowledge it, when we allow, just in that moment or in that hour or however long it takes, that you allow it to be, those are the moments where you actually connect with who you are. Those are the moments who you are actually you. And, how much of that do we even allow ourselves in our life, or have we ever? Usually we're showing up with a mask or how we should behave. And it robs us of our peace. And it actually, as I said before, it creates that suffering, because it's that low rumble that package that you were talking about before, that we just take with us wherever we go. And we can't be ourselves. And so it's, yeah.
You
Yeah.
hit the nail on the
Mhm.
head. It's exactly that. It's that, when I talk about carrying around this weight of, this of having grown up in Scientology and leaving when I did, and everything that happened during and after.
Mhm.
And I thought I could just, leave it in the past.
Yeah.
It
You
doesn't
left
work
it.
that way. I've
Mhm.
come to see, and I've read, studies about the effects of holding on to secrets. Molly says we're only as sick as our secrets. There's science now to back that up.
Mhm.
That these when you have trauma and you keep these things a secret, that there's a tie to chronic illness and, not just emotional sickness, but actually physically as well. And I
Mhm.
really could see how, releasing those things, not just like, oh, it's in the past and I'm walking beyond it, I'm no longer in Scientology, and that's good enough. That worked for me for a little while.
Mhm.
And then it still started to come out sideways, from between. I'm 51 years old, and in many ways, I feel like I've just been around for 11 years, which is how long I've been out of Scientology.
Mhm.
11 years. I miss like so much of the 80s.
That's okay. Those crunchy socks were not that fun. It's fine. It's
No,
fine.
remember when I used to work for My Talk, I had a show on the weekend with Twyla Dang, and a lot of what
Don't
we would
forget.
talk about, yeah, Twyla would catch me up on, she would make a reference to something from, especially if it was the late 80s, so my late teens, when I was in the Sea Organization, which is the paramilitary group part of Scientology, where you're 24/7. There's some pretty ridiculous rules, which I'll be sharing about. But I missed it. We weren't allowed to watch television. We didn't have magazines or newspapers. And so a lot of my time on My Talk, which is a station dedicated to pop culture, was filling in the blanks on all of the pop culture that I had missed, which again, not the biggest thing in the world to be concerned about, but it opened my eyes to what else did I miss?
Ah.
And that's part of the, again, going back to that motivation, which is something that in talking with you, I really helped you uncover, is I finally realized that why I think I can do it now is write about this and not stop writing about it. And number one, if you don't know, all you got to do is Google Scientology or watch Leah Remini's show. It will fill you
Oh,
in a
yeah.
lot. But this is not an organization that just lets you walk away. When people say they escaped from Scientology, they did. It's literally that, especially if you were in the Sea Organization. So when I first left, and I was public in the beginning about it, I did participate in, I was interviewed a few times about it, and talked about mainly the topic of coerced abortions that happen in the Sea Organization and Scientology. I thought, okay, I did that, I can move on. But there's just so much more. And in recognizing now what my motivation is for it, I feel really strong in doing it and in writing about it and in sharing about it, which is going to be me facing it in real time, just like this, which is, but that motivation that you're talking about, for me, that is my motivation, and that is why I think
Mhm.
I'm going to be able to follow through and actually fully disclose it, and not just push it in my past, but go, this happened.
Mhm.
and
Mm-hmm.
then actually be able to not carry that weight around anymore.
Mm-hmm. And that's how, that's how we stick with these changes we want to make in our lives. This is, your why that you're demonstrating is it's both internal and a little external, but it really is very internal with the promise of helping other people,
Hmm.
which, you have a servant's heart. You want to help encourage and um, be that person who can help other people reach their potential. And we're probably going to need to do a life coach Friday on finding your why,
Mm.
because there's a lot of books out there. I love Simon Sinek's book on why. But it's about making this internal so that we will show up for ourselves. The fact that we've gotten a bad health diagnosis and we need to lose 50 pounds is one thing, but does it sustain us? Is that enough? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And so, but how do we make real change in our lives? And that's what we're talking about with with what you're doing and with the New Year's resolutions, which is where we started out today too.
Yeah, till I
It's
hijacked our complete life coach Friday.
it's okay. As she says, a lot of times she uses this as her additional life coaching. So it's just what we do.
It happens, and you know what, and that is part of my recovery from
Hmm.
Scientology, is experiencing the emotions when
Hmm.
they come up. Just, was hoping it wasn't going to be right now when when you're live streaming, but whatever. With our topic of tackling these New Year's resolutions and this tool of identifying the motivation, I want to stress too, we do Life Coach Friday every other Friday. And what we really want to do in 2022 is have you join us on this fun, sometimes not fun, journey of reaching our own goals too. So I
Hmm.
really kind of spilled the beans and shared about one of the big things I'm working on in 2022 and the tools that I learned with Annette through connected life coaching, and doing our life coach Friday helps to make these things happen. It's help it they're tools for us to use to make the things happen that we want to happen, live the life that we have decided that we want for us. And that's a big
Hmm.
thing. And it knows, for most of my life was never what I was doing. And I
Hmm.
know, I have many, many people in my life who feel the same way, who they were never even in Scientology. So these tools that you're going to
Hmm.
be sharing, especially going into 2022, I think it'd be really fun for people to chime in with, what their goals are, what they'd like to achieve, and private message us if you don't want to share it
Hmm.
publicly as well. But then use these Life Coach Fridays as tools throughout the year to help get you there. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of tools that you're going to learn, a lot of tools that Annette's going to share. Can you I'm going to put it in the caption as well, but I want to make sure we do not forget to share where people can find you, because I know you got a new website.
I do. Well, I have a new landing page. The website is coming. I am shifting from Relo Women to connectedlifecoaching.net. And you can find me at connectedlifecoaching.net. And if some of this has really hit home for you and you'd like to frankly have a conversation to see if this kind of life coaching can help you, the first call with me is always free,
And it
because
won't
we've
be live on the internet.
and it will not be live on the internet. But we'll set up a Zoom call and we'll chat. We'll talk about where you are, where you want to be, and I'll help you with visualizing the bridge between where you are right now and that new side of you. A lot of times we have dreams for our life that we really want, but we don't actually believe that they'll ever be able to happen. And that's where I come in, because we know what we want. We know what, maybe even how to do it, but we never actually start doing it. And so there's this gap. And that's what we do, is that we work on traversing that gap and building a bridge to living the life that is aligned with who you really are, not a role, not, anything of the cultural shoulds, but who you are and how you want to complete this life from now until the last day. And so come have a chat with me and actually live. That's the best part of the life coaching that I've received. And that's why I am a life coach today.
Yep. And that's, I know that I'm absolutely going to be able to, well, I have, utilizing these tools so far. I mean, to even be able to talk about it somewhat now here and, doing the writing that I'm doing about my experiences in Scientology and leaving all, I feel like if these tools have helped me so much to get to me to where I am today with that I'm kind of like, what else? What else could I do?
And that's the most fun. So we start with the obstacles, but we really get to that point where we expand life and we hit overdrive for that. And we just make this life something that is all yours and is so far beyond what you thought you could conceive of today.
Yep. So definitely join us on Life Coach Friday. You can watch it if you're watching it on a page now on Facebook, a local community page. You can also find us through, I'll share mine. You can find me at Natalie Webster Realtor on Facebook or nataliewebster.com. And in the caption, I will share where my blog is that I'm going to be writing and sharing about my experience that I just broke down on here and shared with you about. And Annette, I'm going to make sure I share a link as well to the new landing page so people can get a hold of you as well. We would love to hear the topics that you want to hear about too in 2022. So definitely send us those as well because you know what? We want to really discuss the things that you're interested in hearing about. And we've heard from some of you and I'm just fascinated by what we hear, but definitely want to hear more. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck listening to me talk about my issues and potentially crying during a live stream. So please send in your own issues so we can get off of mine.
That's awesome. Exactly.
Yes. And I guess we're supposed to say Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year's.
We wish you the absolute
be safe
best.
out there.
Yeah, definitely. Stay warm too. We're freezing our butts off here in Minnesota. And I hear in Texas too, it's going to get really cold.
It is. We actually like to run like water lines and outside walls. Seems like a poor idea after living in Minnesota. So yeah, pray for us as we hit 22 degrees the other night.
Oh my God.
One night. So yeah.
All right. Well, all right. We will chat at y'all later.